Welcome back to Devotionals, brief devotions for busy people. And today we're not going to be a devotion Cain, we're going to be a devotion Abel as we get into 1 Samuel chapters 21 through 23. So as we're in 21 through 23, what we've just left off in 1 Samuel 20 is this great covenant between David and Jonathan where they've pledged commitment to each other. Jonathan has done this very honorable thing where he is recognizing the Lord anointing David and basically abdicating his right to be his father's heir. And so David is seen by everybody but Saul to be the rightful heir in Israel. And unfortunately for David, that means he's on the run. We leave that with Jonathan basically shooting arrows to tell David, run, get away. And so that's exactly what David does when we find ourselves in 1 Samuel chapter 21. So 1 Samuel chapter 21 begins with this verse. Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to the priest, "The king has commissioned me with a matter and has said to me, let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you and with which I've commissioned you, and I have directed the young men to a certain place." Basically, David's saying, the king sent me on a special mission. You don't need to worry about it. All right? Is that truthful? No, it's not. How would you handle that as a biblical scholar? A lot of people have different questions about this. Some would say, wow, David's done a very unkingly, untruthful thing. This is wrong. Others would say, well, he's trying to put Ahimelech at ease and that it's okay for that reason. And so it's acceptable to lie. Well, this is very difficult for us. Does this authorize us to tell little white lies? No, I don't think so. I think what David is actually trying to do here is he's trying to say, hey, I'm the rightful king. I'm commissioning myself to do this in order to get away from the king who's trying to kill me. All right. And so he's putting Ahimelech at ease. And so he's hungry. You see in verse 3, he's like, hey, what do you got on hand? Ahimelech tells him, hey, the only thing we've got is this bread of the presence. You know, we got the showbread, and it's holy, but you're not supposed to eat that. And David basically says, well, hey, we're pure in heart and in body, and so we're welcome to have this bread. So David and his men eat this bread. And this is something we realize in the New Testament, both in Matthew 12:3 and Luke 6:3, that Jesus refers back to this passage when dealing with Sabbath issues. And so Jesus is very familiar with this incident and with this chapter of the Bible. We as Christians should be very familiar with the Old Testament because it mattered to Jesus and it's part of the entire canon of Scripture. So we look through this incident, and at the end of it, David's kind of preparing to keep running from Saul. And he says, hey, do you have any swords around? Like, do you have anything I can protect myself with? And Ahimelech is like, oh, well, I mean, Goliath's sword is here. And David says, let's see if I can find it. He says, now, is there not a spear or a sword on hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was urgent. Verse 8. Then the priest said, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah. Behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you would take it for yourself, take it. For there's no other except it here. And David said, there's none like it. Give it to me. David knew how to wield this sword, all right? More than that, he understood the faith. It recalled back to his memory what it took to overcome Goliath and ultimately to declare the victory of the Lord, not for himself. And so he takes this sword in order to protect himself. Now, there's bad news. There was somebody there that saw this all happen. Doeg the Edomite was present. Now, for those unfamiliar, Edom, typically an adversary to Israel. If you trace Edom all the way back, it goes back to Esau, Jacob's brother. And so Edomite, Esauite, you could kind of hear those. Those are synonyms, is basically the way you could think of it. But nobody says Esauite because it's kind of a hard word. So they say Edomite instead, because the descendants of Edom, his son. So, chapter 22, verse 7. Saul hears where David is. He hears that he's at Nob. He gets word and he heads there. And in verse 7, he does something very interesting. Saul said to his servants who stood around him, hear now, O Benjamites, will the son of Jesse also give to you all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? For all of you have conspired against me, so that there's no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there's none of you who's sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush, as it is this day. Saul's basically manipulating them. At this point, he's trying to make them feel bad for him. And, well, none of you are telling me about this special bond that David and Jonathan have. And they've made this covenant with each other. And oh, you're all conspiring against me. You're all bad guys. All right, if anybody's seen Hamilton, you kind of feel like King George III right now, and you can hear him singing the song in the background. They're all against him. Nobody's helping him. He's manipulating them. All right? And then, verse 9, then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing by the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nod to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. Doeg is the bad guy. He's like the penultimate bad guy right here. All right, so Doeg speaks up, and Saul goes to Ahimelech, and when he gets there, he's very mad. And he basically gives an order to kill all the priests. All right, the king said to the guards, verse 17, guards who were attending him, turn around and put the priests of the Lord to death, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it to me. But the servants of the king were not willing to put forth their hands to attack the priests of the Lord. At this point, not only has everyone turned over, as he's rightly said verses before this, they are conspiring against him. They are not following him anymore. They have turned to David, and we see in this instance that they aren't even willing to follow his order. Also, you could see how despicable his orders have become. He hates the Lord. He hates the priests of the Lord. He is no longer after the Lord's intentions. It is all selfish intentions, his own self-preservation. How often do you concern yourself not with making the name of the Lord great, but instead your own self-preservation? Maybe you need to step back and evaluate your life and decisions that have led you to perhaps where you are right now, and say, am I just looking out for my own self-preservation, or am I really seeking the glory of God? That's where Saul found himself, and it was not a great place to be. So Saul, what does he do in verse 18? The king said to Doeg, the bad guy. I don't know if you remember any of the old war movies, but there was a guy named Upham in a war movie, and he basically he told the bad guys where the Americans were in Saving Private Ryan. And he's despicable. You hate the character. You can't stand him. He betrayed his countrymen. And Doeg is just as despicable. He turned around and he attacked the priests, and he killed that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Well, that's the priests. 85 priests. And he struck Nob, the city of priests, with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and infants, also oxen, donkeys, and sheep. He struck with the edge of the sword. This is an evil man. This is a bloodthirsty, wrong, awful person. And it's easy to point at him and say, he's the bad guy, he's the bad guy, he's the bad guy. But ultimately, Saul, the supposed king, authorized this and gave the ability for Doeg to do this. Sometimes we're given orders, and we should respond like the guardsmen, not like Doeg. We should have the ethics, we should have higher morals to understand that is wrong. We should not do that. Now, you'll probably never be put in a situation where you're told you have to kill somebody or not kill somebody, but perhaps you're put in an ethical quandary, and you need to respond in a way as a Christian that follows the glory of God as opposed to your own self-preservation. Well, we get to verse 20 or chapter 23, and we can see that David eventually delivers this group of people, this city called Keilah, and so he does that. And at the end of it, there's a pretty important verse, and it's kind of ironic. So these other people, the Ziphites, come to Saul, okay, at Gibeah, saying, "Is David not hiding with us? Now then, O king, come down according to all the desire of your soul and our part shall be to surrender him, David, into the king's hand. And they're basically saying, hey, we're still on the king's side. You're the king. They're trying to do the right thing. They know that David is supposed to be turned over. So they do this, whether that's for their own self-preservation, whatever. We don't know the intention behind it. But Saul says in verse 21, may you be blessed of the Lord, for you have had compassion on me. Do you feel like Saul is able to bless people in the name of the Lord after all of these other things he's done, how he's commissioned Doeg to do what he's done, how he's manipulated his own, or attempted to manipulate his own soldiers and guard in order to wipe out all of those at Nob? There are a lot of people in our lives too that also say, oh, may the Lord bless you. Well, these are evil people. They are not arbiters of the blessing of the Lord. People use this phrase so flippantly. And so one thing that I might encourage you, are you taking the Lord's name in vain in this way? Are you, in one hand, committing treason against the Lord, and the other, declaring his blessings? We can't have our actions and our words not match up. And yet, that's exactly what we see happening here with Saul. He's trying to kill the Lord's anointed and destroy him, and yet give the blessings of the Lord. On the other hand, though, we see David, who is both not trying to eliminate Saul, not trying to kill Saul, and also speaking well of him, but still on the run. It's quite a situation that David's in, and yet he, in greater fear, is actually the one who is receiving the blessing of the Lord. So we need to make sure as Christians, our actions and our words match up to one another, and that we don't pull Saul. Well, hopefully this devotionable has been a brief devotion for you as a busy person. Thank you.